Our scripture reading this morning is from Matthew chapter 14, verses 29 through 31. And he said, "Come." And when Peter was come down out of the ship, he walked on the water to go to Jesus. But when he saw the wind boisterous, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried, saying, "Lord, save me." And immediately Jesus stretched forth his hand and caught him, and said unto him, O thou of little faith, wherefore didst thou doubt?
Have you ever had some challenging times in your life? Difficulties, perplexing situations where you weren't sure what to do? This morning we're going to take a look at a day in the life of Jesus and his disciples. Maybe 2 days, depending on how you read the passage. And we're going to be looking in Matthew chapter 14, as well as Mark 6 and John chapter 6. So it tells us the same story, 3 places, gives slightly different insights. Well, what we're going to discover is that the difficulties that we are going through, the challenges that you are facing right now, are not a surprise to Jesus. God knows what we're going through. That's the first point. Secondly, Jesus is with us when we're going through these things. We are never alone. God is always with us. And thirdly, God actually has a plan to use those challenges, those disappointments, to bring about something good. Even the bad things in life, God has a way, as long as we're willing to work with him, he will somehow bring something good out of that if we dedicate our lives to him. So our story this morning starts with the death of John the Baptist. I sort of relate to John the Baptist. I feel like kind of a wild man. You know, he grew up in the hill country, and then he went out into the wilderness, and he lived out in the woods, and he just came to the edge of the woods to preach, and people would come and listen to him preach, and he would say things that were not popular. And, of course, you know the story. One of the, well, I don't know if it was popular or not, but, you know, he rebuked King Herod and his brother's wife that he had stolen. And I don't know if that was popular with the rest of the people, but it was not popular with Mrs. Herod. As you remember the story. So she ended up manipulating the situation so that John, not only was he thrown in prison, which I think would be horrible. I mean, prison is probably a bad place to be for anybody, but half the people in the world basically put themselves in prison anyway. If you live in a little apartment in a city and you have bars on your windows, you're basically in a prison of your own choosing. But John the Baptist lived in the wilderness. He was used to wide open spaces, the wild animals, the beautiful flowers that God makes to grow out there, and the mountains. And he was thrown in a dungeon, a dark, cramped little place where he couldn't see everything that God had made. And he was discouraged. We remember part of that story. He was so discouraged that he began to doubt the very message that he had been preaching, that Jesus was the one. And he sent some of his disciples to Jesus. And you remember, of course, that some of Jesus' disciples, Jesus' first disciples, were John's disciples. And they had left John to follow Jesus because what John had said. And so there John was in prison, and he ends up being beheaded. And his disciples, it says his disciples came and took his body and buried his body. And can you imagine just for a moment the disciples of John and Jesus' disciples as well, how they felt right at that moment? Here they believed that Jesus was the Messiah who would free them from Rome, that he would exercise his power to do that, and he had allowed his cousin and his forerunner, the one who announced his ministry, he had allowed him to be beheaded by Herod, the representative of Rome. I don't think that we can completely appreciate the impact that had on them. They were just devastated when John was beheaded. And so Jesus said in Mark 6, Jesus is quoted as saying, "Come apart and rest a while." So Jesus took his disciples. He had been very busy. Crowds of people were following him. They were healing. He was teaching. And he said, "It's time for us to rest." Have you ever felt the need for rest? Yeah. You know, sometimes life gets a little crazy. Like you're so busy and overwhelmed. Have you ever been so busy you didn't have time to eat? Yeah? Some of us have. Right? I noticed that when I was in medical school. Certain rotations, I would lose weight because I didn't have time to eat. I was too busy working. And so it was that Jesus and his disciples were so busy, and now they had this burden of grief from the loss of John, and so they went apart, they went aside into a desert place. Matthew says, when Jesus heard of it, this is Matthew 14, verse 13, he departed thence by ship into a desert place apart. He was trying to get away from the crowds to take a break, and what happened? Did he get a rest? Did he get to take a break? Not too long. We don't know how many hours. They had probably a few hours because people were coming by foot. But somehow the people found out where Jesus was going and where the disciples were, and they started coming out of all the surrounding areas and coming out to see Jesus, to be healed, to hear his teaching. And it says that there was a great multitude that followed him out of the surrounding cities, and he was moved with compassion toward them, and he healed their sick. So Jesus couldn't even get a day's rest. I don't know what the disciples were doing, but think about it for a minute. Jesus was there, the disciples, usually they were closest to Jesus. I don't know, have you ever been in a situation where you were grieving and trying to work and take care of other people? It's difficult. They were kind of being worn down emotionally and physically too. Turns out they didn't bring enough food. Like, they didn't have enough food for themselves, and most of the other people that came out didn't bring food either. So they just had this impromptu mass meeting with all of these people, and they didn't bring food. Now, I think that there was some food there, because that's what the text says. You know, they started asking around. The disciples said, "Oh, it's getting late. Everybody's hungry. Send them all away so they can go find some place to buy food." And Jesus said, "You feed them." What? How are we supposed to feed all these people? Jesus actually planned that situation. And it was sort of a test for the disciples, but it was also an opportunity. Do you know, we're told that all his biddings are enablings. Right? That means when Jesus tells you to do something, he also gives you the power to do it. Because that's how the Word of God works. When God says, "Let there be light," there's light. And when Jesus says, "You feed them," you can feed them based on the power of Jesus. But the disciples doubted. They looked around like, where could we buy enough food for all these people? Like, they're looking in the money bag and thinking, like, do we have enough? We don't have enough money. And even if we did, where's a big enough bakery to feed? There was like thousands of people. It says that there were 5,000 men plus women and children. So, depending on how you estimate, that's probably 10,000 people. Maybe more. Because, you know, some of the families might have had 19 children. We don't know. But we do know there was one little lad there. I think he had a mother who probably was busy that day and couldn't come with him, so she packed him a lunch. Because, you know, sometimes mothers think ahead. I don't know where all the other mothers were that day, but one mother planned ahead and packed a lunch for her boy so he wouldn't starve to death when he was going to listen to Jesus. You know the story, right? So Jesus, they find this boy with the lunch, and they tell Jesus, like, "Oh yeah, we looked around and we found there's 5 pieces of bread and a couple little fishes. That's what we got. How are we going to feed 10,000 people with that?" And Jesus said, "Okay, tell everybody sit down. We're going to ask a blessing." Once again, the disciples are incredulous. Okay, fine. Everybody sit down. We're going to eat now. Jesus is going to say a blessing. And it says he blessed and he started breaking. And what happened? There was more than enough food for everyone. The disciples, of course, didn't get to eat because they were busy passing out the food. I mean, maybe they ate later, but, you know, good disciples, just like the deacons at the church, you know, they're busy setting everything up for a potluck. They're not the first ones to eat. And they passed out this food, and imagine that little boy watching his little lunch and those little loaves. I think they were, when I think of the loaves that I think of the little rolls that my wife makes that comes out of the oven. Not like big baguettes, but like the little rolls. I think he had 5 of those. Anyway, Jesus divided them and passed them out. Everybody ate. It was enough, and there was a bunch left over. Jesus said, "Gather up the fragments so that nothing will be wasted." Now there's a lesson for us right there, isn't there? He just miraculously made all this stuff. He could miraculously make more anytime he wanted, but he said, "Don't waste any of it. gather it up. And so they did. And it was amazing. The disciples, all of a sudden, I think they had this shift where they forgot that John was beheaded and that the Romans were in charge. And they're thinking, whoa, it's about time. Jesus, now the people watching this miracle were ready to make Jesus the king. And the disciples were excited because they knew who the key people in the crowd were. Like, you know how it is. You live in Siskiyou County, you know people. And you know, like, there's certain families that if they get together and decide something, that's what's going to happen. You know, that's the way it was there. And there were certain key people in that crowd who decided that it was time. That Jesus he was just too shy or too humble or something. They're going to help him out by declaring him to be king. And with them declaring him to be king and his power to do these miracles, he could feed the army, he could heal, and he just healed people all day long, and he made food. How could you not win with a miracle worker like that? They're going to win, and they're going to kick the Romans out and set up the kingdom of God the way it was prophesied in the Old Testament. They were so excited. They're ready. They're getting together. They're forming up their little bands, and they're putting together a plan. And Jesus says to the disciples, you guys get in a boat and go. And like, whoa, no, Lord, you don't. Wait, hold on just a minute. We have a plan, okay? We have a plan. It's going to work out. This is going to be great. You're going to be the king. Go. He'd never spoken to them like that before. But he spoke like a king, and they had to obey, so they left. There are other people. They were coming to proclaim him king. Jesus said, read in the passage, it says, he sent them home. He dispersed the crowd. And he went alone to pray. Another key lesson for us. We need to spend time alone in prayer. And Jesus did that regularly. You look through the Gospels over and over again, it tells us that he went out to pray. He went apart to a mountain place or a desert place, and he went and spent the night in prayer. And that's what Jesus did. He knew what he was doing because they wanted to make him the king of an earthly kingdom. But he had come to build the kingdom of God, a spiritual kingdom. And by telling them no, many of them were disappointed, and they turned their backs on him. And it got even more so the next day when you read in John chapter 6. It tells the rest of the story. We'll talk about that later. But so Jesus now is praying. I'm going to turn the page here and catch up. Yes. Matthew 14, verse 22. Straightway Jesus constrained his disciples to get into a ship. He constrained them. That means he wouldn't let them do what they wanted to do. He made them go. And they got in the ship, and now their mood, what happened to their mood? They were not happy. They started complaining again and doubting Jesus. Like, well, he didn't save John the Baptist, and he wouldn't let us proclaim him king. Maybe he's not really the Messiah after all. And they start bickering and complaining amongst themselves. Think just what a roller coaster of a day that was for them. Have you ever had a roller coaster day where you were down and then you're up and you're down and you're up because good things are happening and horrible things are happening and it's all mixed up? That's hard. It wears on you. Like it takes a lot of even good things, like just take emotional energy and physical energy from your body. So the disciples were there, they were down and beginning to question. And then what happened next? Now, you know the story. What happened next? They're physically and emotionally exhausted and upset, and a storm comes up on the lake. Out of nowhere. It was a beautiful day a few hours before, and out of nowhere comes one of the worst storms they'd ever seen in their life. And they're literally fighting for their life in this boat on the lake. And they're thinking, we're going to die. We're going to die. Jesus let John the Baptist die. He's letting us die. and they're struggling to survive the storm. And somehow in the midst of their struggle to survive the storm, they forgot about all of their other troubles for the moment. You ever been in a situation like that where you were actually fighting for your life and you forgot about how much money you owed, or what kind of trouble you were in at school, or what your friends thought about whatever? It's like if you're just trying to survive the next 5 minutes, none of that other stuff matters. And that's where they were. It says, Jesus had sent the multitude away. He went to a mountain apart to pray. He was alone, but the ship was in the midst of the sea, tossed with the waves, for the wind was contrary. And in the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went unto them, walking on the sea. Remember I said, whatever is going on in your life, whatever the storm is, you are not alone. Jesus is watching. He is not actually leaving you alone to die in the storm. He's allowing the storm. Now, let me be careful how I say this. I think sometimes God sends storms into our life. Sometimes God allows the devil to send storms to us because he knows he has a plan to flip that around. And sometimes we bring the storms on ourselves. You got me? So we have to be careful to not be too adamant about the source of the storm. But the fact of the matter is, whatever the storm is that you're in, Jesus has his eye on you. He's watching you. He's not leaving you alone. You might feel like you're all alone. It feels like you're all alone sometimes, and nobody cares about you, and that you're going to die in the storm. But the truth is that Jesus is with you. He's watching you, and he is waiting for the right opportunity to show up. And so that's what he did. When the disciples finally realized that they were going to die, and that they were totally helpless, they were exhausted, Jesus comes walking across the water. And what did they think? They thought they were seeing a ghost. I guess if they figured they were dying, then maybe they thought somehow they would see ghosts while they were dying. I don't know. But they didn't even recognize Jesus until finally one of them recognized Jesus and said, "Oh, it's the Lord." And Peter, I love Peter. Of all the disciples, I think Peter and John are probably my two favorite ones, because I feel like I'm kind of like Peter in some ways, and I'm like John in some ways. With Peter, he was never afraid to just say what he thought. He always had something to say. And he's like, okay, if that's the Lord, call me to come to you on the water. I don't know how he came up with that. You really? Okay. And so Jesus says, yes. What did it say? Oh. He said, come. Verse 29. And so Peter came down out of the ship and he walked on the water to go to Jesus. Are you feeling a roller coaster here? Like, this is all in one day. They head out here to be alone with Jesus. The crowd comes. They're starving. A miracle. They're ready to crown Jesus king. Jesus says no. They go out here. They're about to die. Now there's a ghost, and the ghost says, yes, come to me. And Peter's walking on the water. And he's like, woo! Hey, guys, check this out. And he starts sinking. The roller coaster's crashing. You ever feel like you're sinking? Yeah. Not a good feeling. Like if you thought you were going to die in the boat and now you're out of the boat, you're actually sinking in the water. Like, oh man. And Peter immediately cries out, Lord, save me. And it says Jesus immediately lifted him up. Took him by the hand and lifted him up. I think Jesus just like somehow, it's another miracle. Like he was already a miracle. He was walking on the water, but he was over there. Peter's here walking toward him, and then all of a sudden Jesus is just right there lifting him up. Think about this for a moment. All of the things in life, this roller coaster ride, the ups and the downs, God has a plan to use all of those to prepare you for what's coming next. God has a purpose for your life. He has a plan for you. And all of those things, whether he brought them along, whether the devil threw them at you, or you got yourself into that situation, God is working through all of those things to prepare you, to bless you for the work that he has for you to do. This was an opportunity for Peter to realize his dependence upon Jesus. And if he had truly learned that lesson, then a short time later when Jesus said, the devil's after you, but I'll pray for you, and tonight you're going to deny me, instead of Peter saying, oh, no, I would never do that, he would have been on his knees crying out to Jesus, asking for salvation before he denied his Lord. So even in the midst of this storm, this crisis, this roller coaster, Jesus was looking ahead, he was planning, and he was doing this for Peter. He was afraid. He began to sink. He cried out, Lord, save me. And immediately Jesus stretched forth his hand, caught him, and said unto him, O thou of little faith, wherefore didst thou doubt? Oh, sometimes my faith is so little. I dare say that sometimes your faith is little too. We're all not that much different than the disciples. They got into the ship, the storm calmed down. It says the wind ceased, and then they that were in the ship came and worshiped him, saying, Of a truth thou art the Son of God. So God is with us in the storm. He knows what that roller coaster ride is like. He knows how to be with you in that. He knows when to intervene. The question is, do we know that Jesus is with us? Are we willing to submit ourselves to his plan even when we don't understand it? When we want to crown him king and he says no. And so the day ends. The day ends as the ship reaches the shore on the other side. They landed at a place where they had been once before. They came to the land of Gennesaret. You remember the land of Gennesaret? That's the place where Jesus had cast the demons out of the men, and they went into the pigs, and the pigs went over the cliff, and the people said to Jesus, "Get out of here, we don't want your kind around here." And the men wanted to go with Jesus. And again, Jesus said, no. You want to come with me, but I want you to stay here. Stay and tell the people what God did for you. That happened sometime before this. So now they land there, and what happens? Do they get a chance for a vacation, for a rest, for a little bit of peace and quiet? No. It says, when they landed there, the men of that place, when they had knowledge of him, they sent out into all the country round about and brought unto him all that were diseased. They gathered up the whole countryside to him again. Like he never got a break. But this was wonderful. This was the result of the man who knew nothing about Jesus except that he could cast out demons. Just sharing with his friends what God had done for him. And now the whole countryside came to hear Jesus. Oh, what a day. What a day for these disciples and for Jesus. So let us remember, when we have crazy days, there's all sorts of stuff going on, when you don't know what to do, when it's too much, when it's overwhelming, when you feel like maybe you're going to die, or when you feel like you're on top of the world and things are just about to come together on your plan, and Jesus disappoints you. Whatever your circumstance in life is, know that Jesus is there. He has his eye on you. He's watching. He's not far away. And he has a plan to work all of those situations to bring out something good in your life. And we need to choose to trust in Jesus. You know, if you know what's going to happen and you know how it's going to happen, that's not trust, is it? That's the knowledge. It's when you don't know how God is going to fix this situation, you don't know what's going to happen, and you don't know what's next. And like Abraham, when God says go, you say, okay, I'm going. And you've never been there before. You don't know where you're going to land. But God says go, you go by faith. And so it is just like as Peter got out of the boat because he had faith in Jesus. Like his faith faltered, but as soon as he started sinking, he remembered that he needed Jesus. And so it is when we start sinking, it's our opportunity to remember that we need Jesus. And when we cry out to Jesus, he'll be there just like that, reaching out his hand to pick us up. So, what were the three things I said at the beginning? Does anybody remember them? Okay. Well, anyway, Jesus is with you. always has a plan to bring out something good from this mess. And he'll never leave you.